Hey everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Before You Knew Me. Today, we're diving deep with Dara Krug, who's here to share a journey that's all about hitting rock bottom and climbing your way back up. Dara's story starts in a tough spot, dealing with addiction from her early teens and growing up in a home that was anything but easy. But you fast forward through the years of struggles, including moments that would shake anyone to their core. Dara found her turning point in 2014. Now she's living a life she never thought possible, sober, thriving, and making a real difference. It's raw, it's real, and incredibly inspiring. It's a tale of what it means to truly turn your life around. So let's get ready and be moved by Dara's journey from the darkness into the light. Dara, thank you so much for joining me today. I am thrilled to tell I'm not telling them, but you are, about your story that you shared with me. So before we get started with that, I'm going to drink some tea because I need, to get this working. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Dara, and I am a mother of two teenagers. I'm a real estate agent, engaged. Well, and I've been together for 5 years. Let's see, I live in Oklahoma. Been here for about 12 years. And I am one of 3 kids. I'm the oldest. I'm sober.
I can't wait to learn more all about that. So when you came to me with your story, I was just so impressed that you're even willing to share, honestly. And that's something that I commend you for, and I can't wait to share with others your story because it's going to hold such an impact for so many people. The best part to start a story is at the beginning. So I know that there is a lot of early years and early developments that happen in order to lead up to the middle part of life and where you're at now. So wherever you want to start, Dara, in taking us down your journey and the path that you went.
When I was, my using story started when I was probably about 13, 14 years old. I had kind of experimented with a few things like before that, maybe took one of Dad's beers, hit it for like a week or two and drank that warm, and was just like, yeah, that's not for me. I vaguely remember trying to like roll a joint when I was, I don't know, too young to be rolling joints. I don't even know how old I was. And I definitely didn't know what I was doing, but I remember trying that and I was under 12, probably 12 or under. And then when I was 13, almost 14, we moved from Florida in a small town where we had been for about 7 years and moved to a bigger city, moved to Phoenix with where my mom's parents were. And it was definitely a culture shock. I went from being in a small town where everybody knew everybody. And once you kind of get labeled something, like you basically stay that. I remember growing up, my parents like smoked in the house and, they raised Shar-Pays. I don't know if you know anything about Shar-Pays, but they're the wrinkly dog.
Yeah.
And they can be rather stinky. So we'd have like 8 or 9 of those. So I was like the stinky kid and red curly hair. My name's Dara, so it's not, a normal name. So all of the different things that, a kid could be made fun of for, I definitely have been made fun of for those things. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of just this little ginger nerd kid who, didn't have the cool clothes, didn't smell the best when I came to school, and you kind of get stuck in that. And so I was just starting to, hit puberty, and we moved to Arizona, and I'm then like starting to get attention that I had never had before, mm-hmm. And that was a big change for me. And I think that kind of put me in a place where I was like, being around people that maybe I wouldn't have necessarily been around before and engaging in things that, a 13-year-old shouldn't be. I was hanging out with kids that were older than me. I was in 8th grade. And I remember my dad the first time catching me, like hopping into the back of somebody's car. It was a Trans Am with a bunch of teenage boys. And he was like livid. But at the same time, Dad was buying weed off of my friends.
I was going to ask, not every kid just can start out a story of saying like, I had access to drugs and alcohol at such a young age. And I didn't know if maybe it was a parent struggled with this or.
My dad's always been kind of a hippie, and I remember it growing up, like the smell of it, never really knew what it was until I did know what it was, and it really was, I feel like, different at that point than it is now. I mean, I'm sure for some people it's not, but overall, it was, I think, more of an okay thing, mm-hmm. to be like smoking a joint with your kids around, At that point, it was not shared with us willingly, I had just gotten into Dad's stuff, but it started to become something that I was like open to trying,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of where it started was smoking weed with, other kids. And it went from that to, trying other things. Alcohol never really kind of was necessarily my thing for the most part at that point and for quite a while. But at some point later in my story, it to become, part of my story as well.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I was really liking the attention I was getting from other people that I hadn't gotten before. And I think at that point, maybe a little more willing to do things that I had never done to get myself into those circles of people. And I think the first time I tried acid, I was probably also in 8th grade, maybe 15, maybe it was my freshman year, but I feel like I was not even in high school yet. I remember that being a very awful experience, but it wasn't awful enough to stop me from eventually trying it again.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Yeah. A warm beer is enough, but.
And so, after getting sober, I kind of called myself an addict of convenience. Like we kind of was part of my story intermingled, throughout my using career, but it kind of was just like whatever was there. Like I really didn't have a whole lot of boundaries when it came to that. And I'm sure some of it was not really introduced before I was introduced to it by people, peers. And so like I didn't know what meth was or, things of that sort. I think, at that time, like you would hear stories about like heroin users and stuff. And it was always like not somebody you knew and somebody, kind of under a bridge somewhere. And, it just really wasn't something that I was aware of. And we moved around a decent bit. It was my freshman year, or I guess, yeah, there's so much. So like 8th grade, I forgot about the boyfriend. So 8th grade, I had a boyfriend that was in a not great situation. And my parents were like, well, he can't be there. And so they let him like come move in with us. And I was 14 sharing a room with my sister who was a year younger. And we were sleeping on our bunk beds, me and my boyfriend on one and my sister on the other.
Oh,
Still going to school and stuff. And it's crazy to think about it now, especially now that I have children that are literally 16 and 14. And it's insane that, that is how my life went. I think it makes me think a lot about the Maya Angelou quote about, when you know better, you do better. And I think, for my parents, they were doing the best that they could. I know that they probably have their feelings about some of those things now that are much different than they were then. And maybe felt like they were helping somebody in a situation that didn't have a different solution. But at the same time, obviously, like I was in a situation that was not ideal for a kid that age.
Was he also kind of going down that path too?
Yeah. And at that point, I think it was mostly just kind of smoking weed all the time, still going to school and, just running around outside and mostly like behaving given, the other extracurricular activities that, I had going on. But yes, he was. And I can't remember if he was a little bit older than me. I feel like he might've been, probably was. And I honestly am not even 100% sure how long that lasted.
Okay.
Like how long he was there. I know that we had moved again before my freshman year started or right around the time that my freshman year started. So that would have been within like a year, less than a year, 6 months. And he wasn't staying with us at that point.
Yeah. So with all of this, I mean, were you to the point, was it just a matter of trying things, or do you think that you were essentially getting addicted at that very point? Like I don't know how all this works. So I'm definitely like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
I think that I think a lot of it comes from being like really just trying to make yourself feel different, than you normally feel. And for a kid that grew up in a small town, it never really felt important, or, it's always kind of felt like outside of everybody else. I wasn't like as cool as everybody else. The boys weren't interested in me or the girls, whatever. That is just kind of a way to like make yourself feel different and I guess in some cases better, but I think ultimately it's just to change your feelings. And sometimes I think with like smoking weed, it like just lowers those voices in your head. That's like, people don't like me, or I'm not good enough, or I don't fit in here, or did what I just say make sense? And are they thinking like I'm crazy or I'm weird kind of thing? So I think it's more like that just kind of lowered that interior voice in my head that's telling me all these things that's wrong with me. And all the reasons why people aren't going to like me or want to be around me or things of that sort. I don't know that at that point it was something that I felt like I needed to do like all the time, but I do think that it filled a space in me that made me feel different and made life a little bit easier for me overall. And I think that's where it came from, like where that feeling was at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're, headed off, we moved again, right? And headed off into the high school years. Like, how was the high school years for you?
So high school years were even a little more intense. We lived in Phoenix, and Phoenix had a thing where they had a magnet program. So you could be bused to a school that was outside of your district for whatever their magnet program was. The particular school that I went to was for art program. And it was not in the best area of Phoenix. It was South Phoenix. I think it was my freshman year. At one point, there was like a riot to the point where they locked the school down. We were like stuck in our classes for hours, like 3 hours while they locked the school down because of some gang violence. And like multiple helicopters, tons of police officers. But I did enjoy, the program of, what I was going there for. And that's when I met the next boyfriend. Because not only I have addictions to a lot of things about myself. Relationships or ice cream or, drugs and alcohol. Oreos. If there's Oreos in the house, they're not going to last long.
That's the next thing. It is. I mean, people don't think of that either. It's like simple things such as sugar. It really is an addiction. Simple things like coffee. It really is an addiction. So I'm getting off that coffee stint, but next one's definitely sugar. I'm an Oreo fiend too.
Yeah, they are. I do not know what just happened to my light. Is the light okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So the next boyfriend, freshman year, and I don't know how far into freshman year we started dating. I think it was within the first semester, and he was also ended up not being in a good situation. Parents were divorced, and I think his dad had put his hands on him, and my dad was never a fan of situations like that. And at some point he ended up also moving in with us. And I don't know exactly when. There's some things that I just don't remember, and I think it's just kind of part of like, traumatic things ultimately that happen, that like there's gaps. But I do recall he introduced me to meth, and know that at some point within a month or two or something, my dad kind of caught wind of like something was different.
Okay.
I remember one night him like coming to the door, because I was pretty sure that we were like really under the radar and that nobody had any idea that like we weren't sleeping at night. And that was not the case. So at some point my dad was like, I don't know what you're doing, but I know you're doing something. And this is when I ended up introducing my dad to methamphetamines myself. It turned out that him and my mom were kind of going through a period of using cocaine. I'm not sure that they had really done that since like before I was born at that point. So I was probably about 15. And that's kind of when that started. So I was getting high with my dad. My mom wasn't a real big fan of it. And my mom has had a pretty strong personality. And I don't really know the dynamics of like why, it kind of went the way it did. I know that she wasn't happy about it, but I know it also like continued.
The meth with her, is that what you're saying?
I can't even remember really if she did it much. I think she might have tried it, but I don't think that she liked it to the extent that my dad did.
Okay.
So I think there was some with my mom, but I don't think like in general, like it was something that she was doing frequently.
And what you were talking about, like just like the escalation or like the continuation of like just her strong personality, or?
Yeah. So like the dynamics of it, like between my mom and my dad's always been way more laid back, and my mom's always been, very strong-willed. So I don't know, like now that I'm talking about it, like how it didn't get stopped sooner, you know what I mean? How she didn't like put a stop to it at some point. I don't know.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And you said that you weren't sleeping. I'm sure that impacted a lot of your life at that time too.
It did. And I ended up failing 5 out of 7 classes the second semester of my freshman year. I remember one morning, mom driving me to school, and I am sure I hadn't eaten much, because you kind of don't when you're doing that. It was also like kind of a thing where I would see how long I could stay up. So it'd be several days, and the longer you're up, the less sense you make. And your body is not made to do that. So I remember pumping gas at the gas station on the way to school and throwing up in the trash can at the pump because I was like so nauseous.
Sure.
And then just finishing up pumping and being driven to school and going to school for the day.
I mean, sounds like a pleasant day.
Yeah.
I only got 4 hours of sleep last night, and I was not a fan.
I know now if it's like less than 7, I'm like, I can't do this.
Oh, right.
I've been out all night. Not a pleasant feeling. I enjoy my sleep a lot.
100%. I'm with you. And I the older I get, the more I enjoy it, and I'm not willing to give it up for anything.
No, definitely one of my favorite things.
Yeah. So out of, all of this chaos, I'm sure, with you guys moving all the time too, I'm sure that was just kind of a upsetting ordeal in order to make new friends, new people that want to, give you grief, and you meet new people that have different types of drugs. A whole plethora of life happening in your high school years. What was, from there, like, was there anything else in particular that you want to share with us, or was it kind of more or less kind of along those lines throughout the high school years, and then you kind of had a series of wake-up calls after that?
Yes, for sure. So during that time, for my freshman year, the boyfriend I ended up breaking up, he ended up, moving out. It was one of those, like, I'd want to stop doing it, and he wouldn't want to, or he'd want to, and I wouldn't want to. And finally, after we broke up, I think I spent a couple more months still, getting high. I was actually kind of hanging out with the people that were dealing some meth. So people way older than, like, old enough to be my parents and or grandparents, like getting free drugs. I'm really lucky that nothing more traumatic than just that happened to me, with some of the people that I had let myself, that I was engaging with at that time. And then finally, I just decided that it was not something that I wanted to do anymore. And so I stopped.
And go ahead.
And I didn't end up messing around with meth again until like 5-10 years later. I think I tried it one more time, like 4 or 5 years later, and it was sick. And I was like, okay, that kind of worked out how it was supposed to. And that was enough that it was like not enjoyable. And then I didn't mess around with it again until a few years before I got sober.
Okay. And including all of this, just the severity of the situation, right? Like the not sleeping, the throwing up, going to school, like you mentally, and this is just me assuming it's hard to function in that kind of world. And then, like you said, like, thankfully there isn't a lot worse that could have happened that, or did happen that could have happened. Including all of this, there was even more as far as, I think you met another man eventually, and there's, a lot of legal troubles that went on too.
Yeah. So there was definitely a lot more using going on, throughout high school. Switched schools several times, went to, multiple public schools, tried alternative schools, went to an art school for a little bit. And I ended up not graduating, surprisingly. I think I stopped going sometime during my senior year to an alternative school. And I ended up getting my GED when I was like, I want to say 25. And so there was a lot of different things. Like I've tried peyote, kind of everything, like definitely an additive opportunity. So if something was around and it was offered, generally I was not one to say no.
Okay.
Like I'm up for trying that. So sure. So I definitely put myself in a lot of very unsafe situations. When I turned 21, the drinking became more of a thing. I had kind of done a little bit of drinking throughout high school. The way it was is if I was going to drink, alcohol could be purchased for me, but I was not allowed to go anywhere. So there were some parameters on some of the things that I did. There was a lot of things I did outside of those parameters as well. But generally speaking, I wasn't, being bought alcohol and then just like going to a house party. It was like I could have a friend or two over. We could drink at my house where my dad knew I was safe. And so I did that. But I think it also didn't really have the same, it wasn't as enticing because I could. you know? And so it really wasn't necessarily totally my thing. Right before I was 18, my parents divorced. My dad was always kind of my best friend, and he moved out of state. And then I was with my mom. And my mom and I we never really saw eye to eye. Always had a difficult relationship as far back as I can remember. Let's see. So they got divorced. My dad, shortly before that, had had an alcoholic blackout and figured out that he was undiagnosed bipolar and basically self-medicating by drinking and, the drug use and stuff, which is super common for people with mental health stuff. Super common. Like a lot of them don't realize it and they're kind of doing it without realizing it just to kind of make themselves feel better. So he, I think, stayed a few more months after that happened and then he moved. And so that was really difficult to then be with my mom and my sister and my little brother without my dad, because we definitely always butt heads. My mom and I. She ended up running off and getting married. I don't know. It was like a month or two. God, was it a month? I don't know. It wasn't very long. Maybe it was the next year, but they got divorced in like October. I feel like it was the same year she met him, and then kind of were together, not together, together, not together. And then she disappeared for a weekend, like a month and a half after dating him, and was calling me from her way back from Vegas, telling me that she got married.
Oh, wow.
So I don't think I put in there my sister. Ended up getting pregnant right around the same time. So he came and moved in with us, obviously, because he's her husband now, and didn't like some of the things that we were doing. He didn't like that we smoked weed in the house. And so I remember he caulked, like caulk you would use in a shower, caulked our window shut, like my bedroom window. And of course, at this point, like I'm 17, I've, done methamphetamines with my dad. I've had like several boyfriends live with me. I really feel like I'm being pretty mild, just smoking weed in my room, So we didn't also see eye to eye. And so it was a very big change. Mom ended up asking us to move out, and not my brother, but me and my sister. And she was 17 and pregnant. And we stayed with the boyfriend that I was dating at the time for a little while. I think we ended up getting our own place for the first time, and we kind of ended up splitting ways. Like she ended up having my nephew, and then she ended up pregnant with my niece, so she went to move in with their dad, and we had kind of lived together up to that point, had a couple different places, lived with my grandma for a little while. And I think that I moved in with my grandma shortly after that and lived with my grandma for a few years. I had gotten, I think, one of my first jobs in management, and I was doing pretty good. Got my first new car. I think I was maybe 22. I was drinking age. I know that because I nearly wrecked everything just because I, could drink. So I was managing a delivery company, and they like sub out drivers to different, places. So some of them deliver medical supplies, some deliver, parts. And I'd started as a parts driver and then got a job in the office. I can't remember how long I was there, but I do know that basically I got fired because I was only coming to work like 2 or 3 days a week because I was going out drinking and just really not up for it. But I would get all my work done in those 2 or 3 days. So essentially for me at 22, I was saving them money. I'm still getting my work done.
You're like, let me explain to you.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm still getting everything done in that amount of time. But sometimes my drinking was getting in the way of me going to work. And of course, that's not the kind of job it was. They expected their employee to be there Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or whatever the hours might be. And so I ended up losing that job because of that. I think my very next job was my second management position. I started as just somebody that was answering phones at a mortgage banker office, answering phones and like checking the fax machine, filling the printer with paper and stuff. And ultimately they ended up making me an office manager, even though that wasn't a position they normally had. So I don't like to sit not busy.
Great.
So I did a lot around, the office and stuff. And when I apply myself, I really excel in general. I feel like, I learn things pretty quickly, and I'm a problem solver, and I'm not one to just sit around with nothing to do. So, if I have these 3 things to do and I can finish that in an hour, like I'm going to find something else to do.
Sure.
And that's where I met my kid's dad, and really wasn't interested in it at all at first, but he just kept putting himself there, like doing nice things for me, carrying things down to my car, or, bringing me a Diet Coke or whatever it was, a thing, that I liked. And occasionally we'd all go out for drinks at that point. This was 2007 before the bubble burst. So mortgage bankers and, it was a big thing. And there was a lot of really young people in those offices. So we'd go out and have happy hour and stuff. And at some point it worked and he won me over. It was just a whole thing. Like he ended up getting fired because he didn't show up to work on a bad day to not show up to work. And I think it was because he'd been out drinking, and they had me clean out his office. I think they had an idea that something was going on, that we were kind of dating. So I cleaned out his office. I took his stuff to his house. We weren't really dating. We were kind of talking. Yeah. And, he told me he had a roommate. And, I head over to bring him his stuff. And lo and behold, it's not a roommate. He lives with his dad and his sister.
Oh. Okay.
But that wasn't enough to run me off. And I don't even know why. I should have definitely run. But yeah, I don't even know, because I'm not afraid of red flags.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's like a bull, you just, wave the red flag. And I'm like, I'm all in. The worse the idea, the more likely I'm like, what's the worst that could happen? The worst things that could happen are.
Yeah. This is why you were just so like willy-nilly and sure, I'll try that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we start kind of seeing each other in like February of, I guess, 2007. By May, I'm like, I just can't do this. Like, I can't do this. Actually, yeah, it was May. So I'm like, I'm not even sure, how I feel about this. Like, he's out drinking all the time and just, he's so messy. And it really was just more than I wanted to deal with. And so basically the same weekend that I was like pretty much done with him, it was Cinco de Mayo. I also took a pregnancy test because I had not started my period. And I had definitely, as you can imagine, and I was 26 at this time, I lost my virginity probably at 13. So in the half of my life that I had been sexually active, I had definitely not been as cautious as I could be. during my using career and those types of things. It was generally not top priority on my list. So I honestly really didn't think I could get pregnant, and then I find out I'm pregnant and totally ready to dump this guy. And then I find out I'm pregnant. And my sister at this point has 2 kiddos. They're Dominic and Alana. They're like 4 and 5-ish about that time. And their dad's not around. And so I see what that looks like. I was kind of like the stand-in dad. I partnered up with my sister and, helped her take care of the kids, take them to school, take them to breakfast, whatever, because she wasn't available to do. She was a single mom, taking care of these 2 kids. And I didn't necessarily want that for myself or my kids. So I decided to give it a shot, because why not?
Oh, Dara.
Yeah. And so
I appreciate you bringing some humor into this by all means.
No, and it definitely is one of those things where it's just like, I can't help but like giggle about it because I mean it is what it is at this point. But it's just like, what were you think? But at the same time, like I can also be grateful for some of these things that have happened because I know I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it weren't for these, some very terrible decisions I've made in my life, and I wouldn't have my kids, and and so ultimately I feel like it has been worth it in a way, and so I kind of top out at the job I was at, and there was another office down the hall that's looking for somebody, and they kind of refer me and I start working there, and it's like the same week that I find out I'm pregnant. And the person that I was working for was super eccentric, also an addict, very much into it was like a dermatology kind of place, but it was like not really a dermatology place, like they would do like I don't know what all they did, honestly. I worked there for a week.
Okay.
But I knew already because I'd have like outside smoke breaks with some of the staff that worked at that office. I knew the guy was a mess. But I was like, I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Let's just check it out. I've topped out where I'm at and they're like done, they can't pay me anymore. And so, so that was a mess. And he would like not come to work, but he would also like not want to train me. And for somebody that's literally just started, that really makes your life difficult, and I remember them sending me to his house to wake him up, which he was not also a fan of. So right off the bat, he was like upset with me. And I just remember sitting there like staring at my computer. I think my first day I was working till 10 o'clock at night because he had me grocery shopping for him. Wow. And I was just like, I'm not really sure that this is like, I knew there was a real good possibility it was going to go south, but I had no idea to what extent. Did that for about a week. And I was like, I can't run myself ragged like this. So I kind of just let their dad work. Like I did a little bit. I actually, honestly, it's kind of funny. I started work for a friend's husband who was in real estate, and I did that for a few weeks. I ended up slipping and falling while I was nesting and pregnant, and kind of threw my back out. Like I was fine, the baby was fine, but I slipped on some tile and fell smack on my butt, and my back was kind of jacked up after that for a bit. And you're kind of limited on what you can do when you're pregnant. So it was like chiropractor and ibuprofen or something, whatever it's okay for a pregnant women to take. So at that point, it was like the start of letting their dad run things. And I use that term super loosely. Then we ended up getting our own place. It wasn't kind of working out with a new baby and being in the house with my sister and her kiddos. It was just kind of a lot. And
he moved in with you and
he'd already moved in with me, but at this point, like we all set, my sister goes and gets her own place with her kiddos, and him and I go get a place with our, new baby.
Yeah.
And what were you gonna say?
Nope. Yep. Okay. I'm on track now.
Okay, all right. There was like a cat hair floating through the air. So we got our first place, and I think things were kind of okay. I was really enjoying being a mom. Had like a super laid back chill baby. DJ was just probably like the easiest baby. And my cousin and his wife were also trying to have a baby, and it wasn't kind of going as planned. I think at this point, like things still weren't like 100% great with like their dad and I, but I also think that it was good enough for me. Like I got to be home with the baby, and he did the work stuff, and he may or may not come home after work. He may or may not like go out drinking all night, but I was kind of okay with it as long as he like kind of left. And so with kind of seeing the struggles that my cousin was having, I kind of decided to like maybe not try not to get pregnant. Maybe not necessarily try to get pregnant, but stop trying not to. Yeah. And so TJ was maybe 3 or 4 months old, I want to say, when I got pregnant with my youngest, Dylan. So TJ was 16 months old when Dylan was born. So whatever the math of that is, but TJ was not very old when I got pregnant. I was like, I'm already doing it. I'm already doing it. So, so then I have Dill. And well, before I have Dill, TJ, we are now in our 3rd place that we've been in of our own, me and their dad. And I'm like 4 months pregnant with Dill, and it's the night before TJ's first birthday. TJ was born on January 3rd. So it's the night before his first birthday, and their dad goes out drinking, and I get woken up at like 2 o'clock in the morning by him banging on the door and the police. He had not had a license like the entire time that we had been together, but I guess at that point it really wasn't that long, like a year and a half, 2 years maybe. And due to some, I think, DUIs and not paying fines, because in Arizona, which is where we were at the time, if you don't pay your fines, like they'll suspend your license. I'm not 100% sure if they do that in other states. Maybe they do, but for sure.
I'm sure, yeah.
I'm thinking they might too. So, it was just a matter of him not like taking care of the things that he had done. And so he didn't have a license. He was drunk. He, we lived kind of out in the country in Arizona, which is essentially like just a desert. No street lights. I remember we had to install our own mailbox when we moved into this house, which is fun in Arizona dirt. But so he like turns the headlights off and like runs to the house thinking like if he can get in the house, like they won't, be able to just get in. And so he like pulls up in the driveway, leaves the car running up against a tree, and he's like banging on the door, and I'm like totally asleep. Yeah. Like 4 months pregnant, get woken up, like, cops are knocking on the window to try to wake me up. Because at this point they've already gotten him. And, so I go out there, and thankfully, because like TJ's car seat was in the car, and the car was in my name, they didn't impound my car, thankfully, although
Yeah.
they very much had the right to and normally would, because he was driving it and was being arrested for driving it, basically.
Mhm.
That was, honestly, I don't even know that that was the first time that he had gotten arrested
Okay.
while we were together. I think that he had gotten arrested before I found out I was pregnant, and I did what I could to get him bonded out and stuff. Same thing with this case. And of course, I'm not working and I'm 4 months pregnant, and it's like the night before our kid's birthday, and I'm a mess. We're supposed to have this birthday party at our house, and of course, nothing's prepared. And, we pulled it together. My family, my mom, my sister, they all kind of pulled together. We did something at my mom's, and it was good, but I was a mess. Every time I
Yeah.
would look at TJ, it just broke my heart that, like, I mean, TJ's not going to remember it, but, I will never forget it.
Mhm.
That it was like, that was just kind of not really been the start, but it was just, I think, a little bit more of a wake up call as to what I had signed up for. So I get him out within a week because, I'm a good girlfriend and that's what I do. I make shit happen.
Right.
So, I get him out. And of course, like, he's probably lost the job he had, I'm sure, if he's
Mhm.
not been arrested for a week and not been going to work. We ended up moving in with his dad, lived in his dining room for a while. He had court and stuff. He gets sentenced to, I think it was supposed to be like 4 months in
Mhm.
prison. And they called it a prison. It was like a converted grocery store warehouse. And it was like day camp, really. I am
Okay.
home with like a newborn and a 1-year-old. And he's like in this big warehouse. It's like set up from what I've been told, which is like bunk beds everywhere. So it's like this huge room where just everybody's like there. It's like summer
Hmm.
camp.
Hmm.
He can't leave, but he's got a
Yeah.
TV. And I made sure, that he had all the things he needed, money on his books and money for snacks. He had a TV.
Hmm.
Oh, and one of his best friends was also serving a DUI at the same time. So, I was 2 months old when he gets sentenced. So it took a little while because this was January and he goes in, I think, in July.
Mhm.
Bill was born May. So they end up extending it to 5 months. And so he was in prison until December. I
Okay.
took the kids up there fairly regularly to see him. They were young enough that like they had no idea where we were, what we were doing. They just got to see their dad. TJ more so like knew we were there to see his dad. Dill was still very small, so
Yeah.
really no idea. But I took them up there kind of regularly, and just kind of stayed at his dad's, like living in the dining room, which is super ideal with a
Mhm.
brand new baby. Not fun at all.
Yeah.
I'd spend some weekends at my sister's house, take the kids over there, spend time with my family and stuff. Most of my mom's family is in Arizona, so my grandma, my aunt, her kids, and my sister and her kiddos. So I lived in Florida. So I was born in Texas. Not that it's like super pertinent, but I was like born in Texas. We lived there till I was 7. Moved to Florida to be near my dad's parents, and we lived there for about another 7 years until right before I turned 14. And then we moved to Arizona, and I was
Okay.
there for 17 years. I kind of feel like Florida's where I grew up, just because it's from like 7 to 14. It's kind of a very large part of growing up. I feel like so far Arizona's where I've spent the most time, so it's kind of home. So we end up getting another place of our own eventually after he gets out and stuff. The drinking continues. I remember the baby shower, like TJ's baby shower. My mom was so pissed. Like, he would only come like if he could have beer.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
so bad. He
Yeah.
was like really mad. It was like in his
Well,
grandma's clubhouse,
and
and like he had to have beer. So he's like, drinking at the baby shower. And that's kind of how it was. It was just like, if something was going on, like there had to be alcohol.
and how are you doing during this whole time?
I think doing the best I can.
Yeah.
I think doing a whole lot of not talking about what's going on in my life with my family, keeping
Mhm.
things as surface level as I can, but doing a lot of covering things up because I know, deep down that like what I'm doing and where the trajectory of my life is not,
Mhm.
but also I think kind of feeling like I wasn't capable of making a change
Okay.
at that. Even though like I had kind of done things for myself before him and I did an okay job of it. I think I just kind of also let myself get in a place where I was sure that I needed him, and that I wasn't capable of taking care of 2 kids on my own.
Okay. Okay. And where, I mean, kind of where did it, as far as the wake up calls, because you said with him basically ruining TJ's first birthday, that was kind of a start of the
Yeah.
eye opening experiences. Like, what else happened to make it to where you were like, oh, okay, like, we got to make a change here?
Yeah. So I married him at some
Okay.
point.
After he got out of
Yeah, after he was out of PJ was I want to say the kids were 2 and 3 maybe when we got married. And at some point things just started to go bad again. We were in a place, I don't think bills were paid. I can't even remember the order of some of the places. We definitely lived at several places. I remember one place, like the city kept turning our water off and he would just go out and turn it back on.
Okay.
And not really keep me like in the loop. I was
Okay.
smart enough to know that there was a lot of stuff I wasn't being told, but also didn't really want to know.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't naive to it, but I just didn't ask questions. I just let him take care of it in whatever way he was going to take care of it.
Yeah.
I know shortly before we end up moving to Oklahoma, we end up moving in with some of his family, his aunt, because we probably are getting evicted from where we're at or, about to be, not paying rent, whatever it was. Again, like those things wasn't really information I was privy to. And maybe I would have been if I'd asked, but, I didn't. And that lasted a couple months and we had started using meth together. And it kind of made it to where I actually like being around him. And that went on for, I want to say a couple months or something. And of course that situation went south. And so we decide that maybe it's time to like change where we're at. His dad had moved to Oklahoma for work and basically offered for us to move to Oklahoma. Like he would send us money to drive out there. We had his sister's truck. She had some addiction things going on as well. And she was in rehab. And he was like, I'll send you money and you guys can just pack up and drive out here. So we did. We put everything in, everything was already in storage from like a 3-bedroom house. And we packed up whatever we could in the back of this Toyota Tundra, our dog, 2 kids. primarily it was like clothes and the kids' toys.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved to Oklahoma and felt like a change would make things better. But wherever you go, there you are. And that's not how that worked out. His sister ends up getting out of rehab and coming to Oklahoma, and we end up, meeting some people that she's hanging out with. And because when you move, I mean, it's really not really that hard to find drug addicts. You can kind of spot them, you know what I mean? So when you relocate, it doesn't take you a lot of time to find what you're looking for. I think it kind of was more bouts of sobriety, but not intentionally. I think we did a little bit more drinking because we weren't getting high. We didn't really have connections. And then we were introduced to the pills. I had kind of done them a little bit, like we had kind of done them a little bit when we were in Arizona. But for me, I was never really a huge fan. And then we were introduced to like smoking pills, which essentially is synthetic heroin.
Okay.
It's weird. Like you like smoke them on foil. And they stink. But it was like Roxy's is what they're called. I don't even think they make them anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's the whole, I am completely blanking, but there's like tons of stories, tons of like Netflix specials on, people overdosed on these opioids, and some are better than others. But they do make some that are much more synthetic, don't have like the ibuprofen and stuff in them. So we start doing that, and we're living at his dad's, and things just start to go south. I think at this point, like he'd kind of been working. He actually got caught stealing from his job.
Oh, wow.
And got arrested again. And so I did what I could to get him out. And in Oklahoma, when you get bonded out, you no longer have the ability to just get like a public defender. So then you have to get an attorney as well. So I get him out. He's got to get an attorney. We were still using. Kids were going, I think at this point, TJ had started school. So TJ was in kindergarten. I was PTA party mom, which is kind of funny when you think about it. But I was there like doing stuff. I was still quite well, doing class parties and making turkey hands and all the things that you do, for kindergarten. And I wasn't working. So, I'd have Dill up there with me, and we'd, be just doing stuff.
Yeah.
We started doing meth again as well. And I think at this point, like he was kind of stealing money from his dad. And he finally got caught. Like it was again one of those things where it's like I knew about it. I didn't want to know too much.
Yeah.
So I didn't ask questions because it was like not really okay with, but also like I wanted to get high. And there's things that you do when you want to get high that you wouldn't do otherwise. And he was like pawning his dad's like lawn equipment in the morning to get high, and then go sell some drugs and make the money back and get the equipment back out before his dad got home. And that lasted for a little while until he got caught, and his dad knew what he was doing, went and got it out, and then he did it again and got caught again. And then his dad was just like, I can't do this with you guys anymore. I need to leave. And I know it was shortly before Halloween. We just bought a new car, and we were staying at a friend's house, like in a trailer park across from where his dad was living. It just really wasn't going well. I remember him dropping us off in his dad's neighborhood to take the kids trick-or-treating, and it was cold because we're in Oklahoma and it can get pretty cold in December. And he didn't come back. It's hours, and I've got these two little kids that are freezing. Somebody had given me a coat like from their house because we were cold, and I had given the kids my jacket. My phone dies, and I'm like asking strangers if I can use their phone to call him, and like he's not answering. And there's only so far you can walk with a 2 and 3 year old. They've already been walking for hours, and it was about a month before things really totally changed. So that was Halloween, and we're staying with a friend who's also using. They're doing a lot of drugs, and he would generally like monitor, or I was never really let loose when it came to like doing drugs. Like when it came to the pills, it was always like didn't want me to do too much so that I didn't withdraw from them, because withdrawals from those can be pretty intense. And I don't really know if it was 100% like him not wanting me to go through withdrawals, or him just wanting for him, probably a bit of both. And he would just disappear for hours and not come home. He was primarily dealing drugs at that point. I would get calls from the school that the kids, like TJ hadn't been picked up from school. It was like half day school. So like the teachers only got like a 45-minute break in between, the first half and the second half. Probably pretty lucky that we hadn't been reported to like DHS, because again, it can get pretty cold in Oklahoma. So it wasn't always feasible for me to walk over and get TJ from school safely. And I had actually started working. So like before that, I had started like my first job for a good 6 months before that, and ended up losing my job because I wasn't going to work as usual, because that's what I do. I just stopped showing up. Like I'm doing you guys a favor.
I got my job done in a day. You don't need me
exactly.
to.
I'm totally doing you guys a favor here, so you're welcome.
Yeah,
I'll be there tomorrow. Yeah. So so he's just kind of running around. My phone gets shut off. Like I'm just kind of like dead in the water. Don't really have, anyone to call family and stuff. Halloween was okay. And then Thanksgiving comes. And I remember that I probably put way too much mascara on for me about to be crying.
That's okay. Blink a lot.
I couldn't call my family, and they were all gone because it was like a girl's place, and like she had 2 kids and her boyfriend, and all the adults were gone. And it's just me and the kids. And they literally had turkey Lunchables and cranberry sauce, because I was like, they at least need to have some cranberry sauce, because we couldn't make, a dinner. Yeah. And I was like, if this is as close as we can get, it's got to be a turkey at least. And we've got to do the cranberry sauce. And so that weekend, their dad's sister had asked if they could stay the night at her house. Her girlfriend had her niece over, and so we actually let them stay the whole weekend. And so they stayed Friday night and Saturday night. And this had never happened before. I honestly don't even know if they'd ever stayed the night with their aunt before like that.
Yeah.
And so they spend the night. So Friday night, everything's fine. And then Saturday night, we decide to go do laundry. So we drive to like downtown Moore. We'd had our new car for about 6 weeks, and it had a 30-day tag on it. They had mailed the tag information stuff to my father-in-law's house where we were no longer staying. And we were in need of going to pick it up from the post office. So the tag was expired. And I found this out on like Wednesday or something. And so the post office was about to be closed and I didn't get up there. Moore is not the place to drive around if you're high and you have an expired tag and you're not trying to get yourself in trouble. It's tiny. And there's a lot of cops. Like, I think we literally drove past the police station to go to the laundromat. Needless to say, like, we didn't make it to the laundromat. You know, we're driving down. We're literally like 200 feet from the laundromat. Cop passes us going the other direction. Their dad's driving. And I don't know what, I'm sure that it was more than what he said, probably just because it's super late at night. It's like 1:00 in the morning and he turns around and he gets behind us and he sees that our tag expired. So it gives him a reason to pull us over. Lights go on. We drive a little bit further and we switch seats and we're driving like I don't even know, 2010 Nissan Maxima. Not a whole lot of space in there. And he had just picked up. So we had, I don't even still to this day know how many pills were in the car. In a bottle that had the label pulled off from a little old lady that supplemented her income by selling her pain pills. And so we switched seats somehow without being caught. And of course they get us out of the car. All of our clothes are in the back seat, you know, in the trunk of the car. And they put us both in the back of the cop car. And I remember having a conversation with him and I'm super high. I'm high as a kite. Like at this point I was using so much that like I couldn't hardly eat most of the time. I did like to sleep. And I did like to eat. So I would generally at least sleep a few hours a night. So it wasn't like a marathon of like trying to stay up as late as I could, but still not healthy, you know, obviously. And we have a conversation about me taking the charges because I have never been charged with anything before. At this point, I'm 33. He has a pretty extensive record. You know, multiple different, I mean, even at that point, he's already been arrested twice since we've been in Oklahoma for 1.5 2 years, whatever it was at that point. And that's not even counting his criminal history from Arizona and unpaid fines and things of that sort. So why not? What's the worst that can happen? So I say, okay, I mean, what else am I going to say? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
And I'm like, also, do they not record in the back of cop cars? Like, do they not have all of that on tape where like he's literally out?
I don't know.
Crap,
yeah.
You know? So I get arrested and I watch some girl pick my husband up in our car, some girl I've never even seen before, you know, and watch them get our stuff out of the back of this car that the cops are about to impound, you know, watch them bring the police dogs, which they said smelled things. I'm still not convinced. They were like, it's medication in a bottle. But I think ultimately we ended up having to tell them where it was because couldn't find it. And they let me take the charge. And so I go to jail for the first time in my entire life. I'd been in a holding cell because apparently, so when I was like 18, I took the rap for some weed because my sister was driving at 17 and pregnant. And they just held me for like 3 hours, I think, just to prove a point and let me go. I don't even think it was even on my record. Like, clearly I have an MO of like taking charges for people. So it was like so bad. It was so bad. You can only make collect calls for one, and you can't call a cell phone collect. So there was, of course, one phone number that I remembered, and it was my grandma's. So I have to call my grandma, you know, the weekend of Thanksgiving to be like, hey, like I've been arrested. And they've got me on, I think, possession of paraphernalia and possession of a controlled dangerous substance, which is a felony. And so I get arrested like 2:00 in the morning. And that was the last time I've ever been high. So I was in Cleveland County Jail, which is really, it's like a daycare. It really is. Like, you can shower whenever you want. It's really clean. There's TVs, like it's open bunk style, but it was like the worst week of my entire life.
Sure.
I'd never been away from my kids for more than 4 days. And that was one time for like my best friend's wedding. And outside of that, like I was with those kids every single day of their lives. And so I've got to call, you know, I call my family and tell them what's going on, and they can't bond me out because they're not in Oklahoma.
Okay.
So now I got to find somebody that can. The kids' aunt had them, and my family starts calling my husband to kind of see what's going on. And it's a lot of like not answering the phone. It's a lot of like broken promises, like this is what I'm doing. And basically he was trying to sell enough drugs to get the money to bond me out. I don't even remember what the bond was, but maybe $5,000 or something. It wasn't super crazy, but it was enough, you know. And he just leaves the kids with his sister. And I find out later in the week he even took our dog there because apparently that was too much work to care the dog. Yeah. So they have our kids and they have our dog, and he's not returning anybody's phone calls.
Okay.
So Saturday, because I go to jail at 2:00 in the morning on Sundays, the next Saturday his dad co-signs on my bond to get me out. That Friday, he goes to court to take emergency temporary custody of my kids, which is super easy because they already have them. And so he gets granted that. And then the next day co-signs on my bond. So, you know, I did all the begging and pleading I could do about like whatever I needed to do. I made all these promises. I really at that point still didn't think I was an addict. You know, just I'd made some poor choices and put myself in some situations I shouldn't have been in. But that I didn't really have a problem. And so, you know, I mean, at this point, 33, I'd already been using basically almost 20 years. And so maybe some accidental sobriety within that time, but nothing intentional, really.
Sure.
So I make some promises, you know, about going to like an Oxford house, and it's like a sober house, basically. You pay weekly rent. You have requirements for meetings. They can drug test you if they think you're using. You have like meeting sheets you have to fill out. You know, you take it to the meeting and somebody signs it for you to show that you were present. So I do that. I pick one that's not as close to my father-in-law's house and where we were. It was about a 30-minute drive, but I didn't have a car. So after a few days, I decided like I can get into this other one that's in the same city as him. So I get transferred. And it wasn't a great idea. I hadn't gone to any meetings at this point. I know like the first night I was there, I had a dream about using, and it was something I didn't know would happen. And it was so real that I literally thought I would fail a drug test the next morning. It was like so vivid.
Yeah.
So I go to this other sober living house. I hold out from calling and talking to their dad for several days. I didn't have a phone anyway. I had started a new Facebook that wasn't, with my name so that I could like correspond with family and things of that sort. Cause it was like a computer at the sober house. And I lost less than a week of not talking to their dad. I had gone to like my first meeting, AA meeting, and felt super uncomfortable, but I also felt like maybe that's where I was supposed to be. And so I was kind of doing it, trying to find a job. I then start talking to their dad again. And my mom always says he's a narcissist. I kind of think my mom was a narcissist too, but maybe he is. And
Sure.
maybe I also just really attract those types of people.
I think there's a little narcissism in all of us.
I think so too. And I always want to see the best in people. Like, I'm always like, I mean, there could be like all these bad things, but it's like, I've seen like the good, and it's like, I hold on to that. And if that's the exception and not the rule, to my detriment in some cases.
And just for clarification too, was your husband who got custody of the kids, or was
his dad?
Okay, I thought so. I just want to make sure. Yeah.
So it was his dad. And at this point, I'm not even sure like he knew. Supposedly he showed up that Sunday, like the day after I got bonded out to bond me out. I really don't necessarily believe that was ever the case.
You guys weren't talking whenever you got out. It was just a matter of you trying to do whatever you can to get your kids. And we don't even know where he's at.
Exactly. So, we kind of go weak, and then we start talking again. And I didn't hide from the people in my sober house that I was seeing him. And it's really kind of not a good thing, obviously, that I'm hanging out with somebody that's using. So they had drug tested me. There was a couple people that just really didn't agree. I'm sure that a good portion of people in that house did not see me staying sober. Given the situations I was putting myself in, there's no reason why I should have stayed sober. It was definitely a God thing, and it had nothing to do with me and my choices, because I would have been high again. So after about a week, they give me notice that I need to leave. But because I didn't fail a drug test, because if you fail a drug test, you have like 15 minutes to pack your stuff and get out. Because obviously everyone else there is also sober, and they can't have that.
Right.
Since it wasn't due to me not being sober, they gave me 24 hours. And so I think that I moved back in with his dad for like, that was the idea. But I think maybe in between, I agreed to like stay the night with him one night.
Okay.
And that just started the whole ball rolling again. He was living in a hotel, or he was staying in a hotel that night. I don't know where he'd been staying, like when we weren't, like while I was in jail. That proceeded to be life for the next 6 months-ish. Okay. I think I kind of stayed with his dad for like a month and kind of was still seeing him and hoping that things would get better. He would kind of go to meetings with me. I was going to a lot of meetings because I wasn't working. I'd also had worked for 6 months previous to getting sober, or getting arrested, but I hadn't been working for 4 or 5 years since I had gotten pregnant with TJ's, basically. Okay. And so I had this huge gap, and now I've got charges pending. You know what I mean? So I've got to list that on my application. So basically everyone else is going to look better on paper, So I'm going to meetings regularly for a while. We're living in and out of hotels. I think the longest one we stayed at was like almost a month. And then there was a fight, and we had to like pack everything up and get out of there before the police got called. I was solicited at one point doing laundry at one of the hotels, because that's the kind of place we were staying, Yeah. And I'm like, just doing laundry, totally married. So then it got to the point where I really wasn't allowed to go anywhere without supervision. And that included meetings. So I really wasn't leaving. I was working for a little while when I first started to live with him again at Burger King. But I got fired from that job because I was depending on people that weren't sober to get me to that job. And I'd missed or been late more than once, and I got written up, and then I got fired for it. So now I'm like just sober, hanging out in a hotel room with addicts. And the week that I was in jail, I think their dad started shooting up heroin. Heroin is a heck of a lot cheaper to get than pills. And it was a lot easier to get. And I honestly had no idea anything about that. Even after like 20 years of using, I knew like one person, and it was like a friend of a friend. And I'd been around, it was like a friend's cousin. And I really had only been around him a couple of times and still had no idea. It was still one of those things, like I just didn't know anybody like that. But when I was in jail, there was a girl that came in with she had a miss on her arm, and she had missed a vein when she was shooting up, and she had this like softball sized bruise on her arm. And I never knew what that was before. And I learned while I was, in county jail. And a couple weeks, a month or two, I don't even know how long it was. It was like a month or two after I was, living with him again. He was taking a bath, like chilling, trying to, whatever, probably partially detoxing. I don't even know. But I brought him some clothes into the bathroom and a towel or whatever. And so he was undressed, and I see this miss on his arm. And at this point, I now know what that is. And so I asked him, and of course he, kind of tells me kind of lies, figured out that he was getting high with somebody I had been going to meetings with. And that got around real quick.
Sure.
And so that wasn't a good thing. And I think that's really when I stopped going to meetings. I was having dreams of shooting up, even though I'd never shot up in my entire life, but I was around it so much. He was basically just dealing heroin or whatever else, there was, pills, heroin, whatever. And it had even gotten to the point where there would be times where he would, what they say, re-up and get more, and then have all these people waiting and start falling asleep while he was like selling people drugs.
Okay.
And so I was doing it because I wasn't going to have him get jacked.
Yeah.
While we're there together,
Yeah.
And so I'm really thinking that we're getting close. Like he's getting more money, and I'd been going to family court too. That was the other thing. So I had these requirements that family court had wanted a bit of, and a lot of it was up to his dad. He didn't require that I do parenting classes because he never thought that I was a bad parent, just felt like I'd made some bad choices. But I was already required to go. They were requiring me to go to meetings. So I was doing that. And because I had never gotten in trouble before, the charges were going to be deferred. I think it's deferred. Basically, as long as I made it this span of whatever the requirement was, like 4 years without getting in trouble, they would disappear off my record
Okay.
because I hadn't been in trouble before.
Right.
7 months and 1 day sober. I'm in the car with him. He had just re-upped. Excuse me.
You're
He had
good.
just re-upped and had a bunch of drugs in the car. He was in somebody else's car. The house that we were leaving was being watched. They were about to raid it, so they followed us. He ran from the cops in the middle of rush hour traffic, hit a car, ran the car into a tree, left it running, and I was in the front seat. He got out and ran. There was somebody in the back seat. It was a Mustang. I get out. I run. I make it like halfway across this parking lot. I'm like, why am I running? Like, I literally
Yeah.
don't have anything on me and I'm sober.
Yeah.
So I stop and the cops like grab my purse. They throw my purse. They leave me in the middle of the parking lot. And it's a bunch of undercover cops, like dressed in regular clothes and pickup trucks and stuff. They run after. He runs through this Saltgrass restaurant. He's like running through the kitchen. They catch him. They catch his friend. They sit us out there for a while. Eventually, they put us in the car. They drive us to the house that just got raided, where those people are also in the back of a cop car. And then we all go to county jail. If you ever for funsies want to Google Oklahoma County Jail, you can see that there's a lot of very bad things that go on there, and it is not a very nice place to be. Which is why the first place I was in was like a daycare.
Sure. Okay.
So I was there for 5.5 months fighting going to prison. I had the pending charges out of Cleveland County that had I missed my court date because I was arrested and now incarcerated in Oklahoma County. And at one point they tried to offer me a program, but it was a program that was meant for people that had been convicted of previous charges. So they had me wait like 45 to 60 days in between court dates just to tell me right before that court date that actually you don't qualify for this program. Our very first court date, they actually assigned my husband and I the exact same attorney. So I almost didn't have court then because they couldn't have the same attorney represent the two of us in the same case. Clearly, I don't even know how you don't figure that out. Like our case was identical. Because he had pending charges where he'd already been arrested in Oklahoma. He actually was in county for a month before he went to prison, sentenced, and got to go to prison, which is much different than county jail. They have a lot more freedom. It was definitely not as bad as Oklahoma County. So I sat there for 5.5 months. I was, I think, the last one to get out of the 6 people that were arrested. And after I finally got sentenced, I got sent back to Cleveland County for 2 weeks to await sentencing there. And because now I had caught for 6 more charges, 3 felonies, 4 misdemeanors, on top of my original misdemeanor and felony, like that, the program that they were going to offer me, or the ability to like not get in trouble for 4 years and have it go away, clearly was no longer on the table.
Right.
So I spent 2 weeks there. They sentenced me. I'm still technically on paper, is what they call it. If I were to get in trouble now, I would be incarcerated until 2027. But being sentenced for 12 years, suspended sentence is what it is. So like you're let out on probation, but if you get in trouble within that 12 years, you have to go serve the remainder of your time. And so I do, I do that. I get out and, I stay sober the whole time in county jail, which there's a lot of drugs in Oklahoma County jail. It's not difficult at all to get high.
I was initially thinking like, well, this is actually kind of a good thing. You have to stay sober for 5 months, but that also makes sense that I'm sure there is, a lot of stuff running through there.
It's a whole thing. Oklahoma County has a way that you can like pass things from floor to floor through the toilets. I'm not even gonna get into it. You'll probably Google that as well. But they can pass things around. It's like all connected in a way that you would not even realize is possible. And so I stay sober. I get out. He ends up getting sent. I don't even remember. I think he came back. I think he went to prison and he came back a couple weeks before I got sentenced. So he was already in prison and then he came back to Oklahoma County to get sentenced for the new stuff. He was sentenced to 6 years. Well, 14 years. But you do like a certain percentage for depending on the severity of the crime. So there's like violent crimes and there's 2 types where you do 85% of your time or you do 45%. Because he had a weapon. He had some guns that he purchased off somebody that were stolen and he was already a felon. So he had possession of an offensive weapon in the commission of a felony and he had thrown them out of the car. His sentence was considered violent because of the weapons, even though like he didn't use them or even attempt to, because he wasn't supposed to carry weapons. And so he had 45% of his time is what he was required to do. So I get sober and I stay sober. I get out of county. I stay with his dad. His dad helps me get a car. Before that, for 2 years, I was like hoofing it everywhere. Oklahoma City and more does not have bus system like other places. And so I would just like get a ride downtown more and I would just hang out all day. I worked at like a call center that did like political surveys. And I am not a call center kind of person, but it was like all teenagers and retirees. But I did that and I worked at Jimmy John's. I had 2 part-time jobs, didn't even have full-time hours, and went to meetings as much as I could. I ended up applying at a job downtown Oklahoma City with somebody that I was dating. And I think she worked there briefly. I really wasn't intending to work there because I lived like 30 minutes away and I didn't have a car. And there's, the bus system is almost non-existent here.
Sure.
And they offer me a job. And so I get full-time hours in one job. And so I take it. And I ended up being there for 4 years. By the time I left, I was made the scheduling manager for the front of house of the restaurant. I want to say, I think it was 2009. Well, I know it was 2019. I met my fiance at a meeting, and she has a sister that owns a management company. And so after about a year of dating, she asked Jewel how she felt about her offering me a job. The last week that I would have been at the restaurant was the week that COVID hit and shut the restaurants down. The restaurant was locally owned and they tried to do like a food truck for a few months with produce and things of that sort. But they never actually recovered after COVID and never like actually opened back up fully. And so it's kind of a blessing in disguise for sure. I really wasn't sure how it was going to go. You know, I'd done management in several different arenas, but hadn't done property management. And, you know, and I totally didn't even talk about getting the kids back. I'm
Well, that's
like so
okay.
far in. Okay.
I mean, I assumed whenever you said that his dad let you, live with him, I assume, there was progress there and you were able to be with the kids and didn't know if you could.
So the other thing is that their grandfather, I'm probably not even tell him that I'm doing this, so he'll never hear it, but he's an alcoholic. Who
Okay.
doesn't think he's an alcoholic? So
Mm-hmm.
within about a week of him having the kids never actually lived there. They live with their aunt and their aunt's
Okay.
girlfriend. And aunt's girlfriend's sober. She's still very much a part of their lives today. Paternal aunt had some sobriety issues. She's actually in prison now, which is not something I ever saw for her. But after 3 years and a week from the date I lost my kids, which was December 7th, I want to say, 2014, I was granted custody back of my children December 15th of 2018,
And
2017.
I'm sure that was just like challenge after challenge after
It
challenge.
was because I had to have a job for a year. I had to have a place for a year. So I got my very first home place. I'd never actually lived on my own. I'd always lived with either a partner or my sister and I had a place, or I'd lived with family. I liked all my friends way too much to have ever moved in with any of them because I never ever saw those good stories come out of that. So I was like, we're too close for that to happen. I'm not going to do that. So, you know, it was exciting. I was working at the restaurant and I got the kids back. Somebody that I worked with at the restaurant that I got really close to, she like actually like found me an apartment that was like one street behind her and close to where I was working downtown. Is where I was living at the time. I had limited places that would rent to me being a felon.
Sure.
And so it was like South Oklahoma City, not necessarily somewhere I'd want to put the kids in school at. And so once she calls me one day and is like, hey, I set up an appointment for a viewing for tomorrow when you're off and we're going to go look at this place. And it ends up, you know, being amazing. And the kids went to a really great school in downtown Oklahoma City. It's Mesta Park. It's like picture perfect. Everybody literally walks their kids to school the first day of school. It's like a zombie apocalypse. It was like the craziest thing. I was like, what is going on? You have mansions, you have regular cars. Like here I'm in a beater and then there's other kids being dropped off in like G-Wagons. And I'm like, I mean, you know, and the kids really liked it. We ended up moving to Edmond when my lease was up there because Oklahoma City didn't have the greatest schools and Edmond has really good schools. And so we moved to Edmond. I was actually renting from Joel's sister before she offered me, you know, the job. The kids were, you know, going to good schools. I started working for her. 2020 was actually probably one of the best years I've had. I did a whole lot of working on my credit, paying a bunch of stuff off. My credit score went up 100 points. I was able to buy a car in my name without needing a cosigner and got really good rates on it even. Then started to work on like saving for a house. Joel has been a super amazing partner and is actually a partner. I don't think I'd really realized that I'd never really had that until I had it. And it's different, you know, and I had convinced myself for so many years that I wasn't capable on my own and really slowly began to figure out that like not only was I capable, but it was almost easier, you know, without
someone else that you had to take care of.
And you know, here I was like trying to make something work for the kids so that they had both of their parents, and ultimately the decision that I made by doing that took both of us out of their lives. You know,
that's a huge reflection.
Yeah, and I also feel like the time that I spent in Oklahoma County, which ended up being my most permanent address that year, like 201 North Chartel, which is weird. I still probably shows up my credit report, and it was awful, you know. But at the same time, like I really feel like it was God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. I don't know that I would have otherwise left or done, maybe eventually, but I think that put enough space and it made it to where I didn't really have a choice about that situation ending. And I had to do it. You know, I had to do it. And, you know, for a while it was hard doing it by myself. You know, their grandpa was still helping out buying them coats and their aunt was helping out buying them backpacks and school supplies, you know, but there was people there helping. And, you know, Joel and I started dating and she just kind of saw me differently than a lot of other people had seen me. And we'd have these deep conversations and I would think about things that I'd never thought about before, like what I really wanted in life. And at that point, I really felt like I had the things. Like, you know, they say like when you first get into the rooms and get sober, you know, you make this list of the things that you want and you're going to look back at that list and it's basically going to seem so small, you know? And it was like, get my kids back, get my own place, have a car, you know, have a job that was reliable and paying the bills. And, you know, I had those things and I didn't really think past that at all, you know? And so Joel had always like dreamed of having a house and my parents didn't even own a house. Like it wasn't even something that was ever on my radar, like at all, or even close. You know, so we, you know, work on credit. We save money. We did a lot of that during COVID. And she started her own business and we made it happen. We bought our first house. We spent 2 years driving around Edmond. I mean, there would be some weekends in Edmond, it's not that big. But we would use like a half a tank of gas, just driving around Edmond, looking at neighborhoods to try to figure out like where we want to be. And we did end up having to move into a different school district from where we were at, but we didn't really like all the houses that were over there. And so we closed on our first house in April of 2021. And the kids like have, you know, their own bedroom. And we went and got new beds. And it's like, I feel silly talking about some of the grown-up things I do because there's lots of grown-ups that just do that. Naturally. And it's not, you know, it's not like something, you know, you get a gold star for, but
coming from the path that you came from, that's a big deal. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it really puts things into perspective.
It does. And it's crazy because it's like, you know, getting sober and, you know, and it seemed like such an insurmountable thing. And I really just thought I was there just to like fade the heat is what I usually say, is like just to get everybody off my back and show everybody that I didn't need to be there. And I very quickly, thankfully figured out that I was exactly where I needed to be. and had, such an amazing support system of people that I met that were there for me, that would pick me up in snowstorms to take me to a meeting if I needed a meeting, and maybe dropping me off at 2 different houses in a week's time, because now I'm not in a hotel anymore. We're in a different one. But they showed up for me, and they loved me when I didn't know how to love myself, and believed that I was capable of doing something different with my life than what I had always done with my life. And getting sober at that point, like, it just didn't, it's like, what do you do with yourself? It's like, it was like drinking water or, eating. Like, it just didn't, I couldn't fathom what life looked like without the drugs and alcohol. It didn't make sense. It didn't seem like something that I wanted to participate in. But I also didn't want to not have my kids, because they're, by far the most important thing in my life. And, so I go through these like 3 years of like, the kids aren't even where they're supposed to be. My mom's mad because I'm not rocking the boat and telling the court. And I'm like, so that it just never stopped, what all the different things, it wasn't always the easiest to see them. Sometimes things were made difficult when they could have gone differently. But again, like, I just didn't want to rock the boat. My, father-in-law had all of the control when it came to court stuff, and I wasn't going to do anything that would jeopardize, how and when I could get my kids back. And they slowly transition them, no matter how much I had already checked all the boxes. It was 3 months of unsupervised visitation, and then it was another 3 months of weekends. So I'd get them from the minute they got out of school Friday night, or when their aunt got off work and we met, and I would take them to school Monday morning. And
I've got a question for you, Dara.
Yes.
As I know that, you had the kids to really push you to persevere, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of other people that might be listening too, if they are in a situation similar, but they don't have kids, like, what would you say is like, I mean, I'm sure there's so many great things about sobriety that have been in your life, right? But like, if somebody didn't have kids to really be that push, like, what would you say to them to sit there and be like, this is the way?
Well, I honestly 1,000% believe that, like, regardless, like, you've got to get sober for you. Like, you can't do it for your kids, and you can't do it for your spouse. You can't do it for your job. You can't do it for your family, because as soon as those things change, then there's not a reason anymore.
Sure. Right.
As soon as you're fighting with your partner, like, you're like, well, you know what? I'm going to go get high tonight. I'm going to go into the bar. I'm stopping to get a 6-pack on my way home. So it has to be, I have goosebumps. It has to be like, because you want to do it for you, and that, like, you're worth it. And it's just like, I know it's crazy, because it's so different. And I think, like, when you come from a place where, like, that's all you come into a place where people, like, want you to do well for you. And it's hard to, like, take that, it's hard to believe that there isn't an ulterior motive, that somebody's not just wanting something from you.
Right.
When you're using, like, all of your relationships in some manner serve a purpose. They serve a purpose for that other person. They serve a purpose for you. You know what I mean? Like, most relationships, when you're in the middle of addiction, don't have anything to do with you and that person. It's just like what you can provide them or what they can provide you.
It's a convenient, really.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times it's like you find that, like, you don't have anything in common with lots of people. Like, after you get sober, like, there's not a reason anymore. But it just kind of like, it was like being born again. Like, I feel like it sounds super cheesy, but
I love
it. Things look different, and life is different. And it's like, having my own apartment at like 33 was like so exciting, or 34, whatever it was. I don't think I was 33, because it was a few years after I got sober. But going through some of these, like, super difficult things, and just being able to succeed, and seeing, like, I know for a lot of people, like, getting into the rooms, the God thing can be complicated for some people, in their relationship with God. And for me, like, when I started to get sober, I had a belief in God, but I never believed in God like my grandma, who, like, prayed. I never really saw, a need for any of that. But then when you start to, like, pause long enough and let things change, and you start to see these things happen, it's like, what else is the explanation for this? And another thing was, doing the next right thing. Clearly I'm really good at, like, not doing the next right thing. So it was like, I may not know what the next right thing is, but I know what I shouldn't be doing. And that was really how I gauged those things. Like, what should I not be doing right now? I'm going to not do that, because it was different. It was also different, making different choices and not just making the same decisions that I would, the easy, quick things that might make me feel better right now. And it was hard, going through holidays and different things, and just, like, not being able to participate in life like that. I remember the first time I went to the grocery store, I went from having a husband and 2 kids, and now I'm grocery shopping for just me. But outside Walmart on the bench, like, crying. Like, it was hard, and it was like something I didn't see coming at all. I had not mentally prepared myself for that. But the people I met, it just seeing how different people's lives could be, from just slowly making a change just for, like, this minute, this day, this hour, and I keep thinking, like, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time. And that's really what it was. It was just, not stepping back and thinking, like, I'm going to stay sober for the rest of my life. Even now that's, like, weird to say, because I don't know if that's what it'll be, but that's not how, I've approached it. It's just for today. And, just trying to show up differently for my family and my kids, and knowing that they're not gonna have to worry about getting a collect call for me. Whatever county jail I might be in this week.
Right. Well, I can only imagine just, like, the different, I mean, really is, you feel like it's corny, but I can believe it. Just feeling that born again, just feeling the grace of people around you. It's just, you live a different lifestyle, and people do want to help. And, I know for something that's as simple as coffee, giving up that's difficult. And so you definitely have to give it up for yourself. You definitely have to go day by day and sit there and be like, okay, not having my caffeine today. I can do this. What am I going to do to not make those bad decisions today?
Exactly.
So,
very much similar.
yeah. And I know that we're closing in on time here, but I would love to just offer to you too, to any encouraging words that you might have for anyone struggling with addiction or feeling stuck in despair, or, maybe even highlighting some resources, supports that you had the opportunity to experience that really made a difference.
Yeah. So I found my way within the rooms of AA. I know that doesn't work for everybody. And it's not really like a program that they promote, but there's resources, there's tons of resources, different churches do things, there's groups, whether it is AA or NA, they have Cocaine Anonymous, there's a ton of different programs. And even if it's, maybe not where you find like you're comfortable, there's people there that have been in your shoes. And it's like, some of these crazy things that you've been through and you feel like super alone, like other people don't understand, like there are people that understand, and I think a lot of it is just knowing that you aren't alone. And that there's people out there like more than willing to help hold you up. And so you can hold yourself up is helpful,
Yeah,
like
no,
very
absolutely. I think anything in this life, I mean, for me, I know that God intends for us to have community, and that's really a big, having the support system behind you, no matter what the situation is, just finding that person that believes in you, so that way you can learn to believe in yourself. I feel like that's a big first step moving forward.
It is. And even if you walk into like some room somewhere and you decide like those aren't your people, like try a different time. Because you'd be amazed at like how different like a 5:30 meeting can be from like a noon meeting to like a 10 p.m. meeting.
Smart.
If that's, something that you're wanting to try, like there's people.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly smart. Well, thank you so much, Dara, for just sharing so much of your life and honestly incredible strength and resilience that I hope that listeners that are listening to your story can find within themselves, no matter what battle they may be facing. And to everybody listening, I do want to just say that if Dara's story has inspired you, or you've got your own story of triumph over adversity that you're ready to share, we'd love to hear from you. But I just am so appreciative, Dara, because I know that your experience can really light the way for someone else in their darkest hour. And I know that it's hard to remember that so many of the struggles that we face today, that there is somebody else that has overcome that before. And so anything is possible. So
yeah. If I can do it. Yeah.
If Dara can make the decision to not make a bad decision that day, we can do it.
Exactly.
But I love it so much. And, a big thing that I grabbed from this is just for everybody to keep pushing forward, keep believing in better days, and never underestimate the power of your own story. So
absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yep. And until we meet again, I hope everybody takes care of yourselves and each other. And remember that no matter where you're at on your journey, there's always hope and there's always a way forward. So we'll see you next time on Before You Knew Me.